The number 4 greatest team to win the Super Bowl. The 1989 San Francisco 49ers. You could make a very, very convincing argument for this team to be number 1. In fact, any of the 4 teams in the top 4, you can make an argument to convince me to be number 1. But of all the teams I didn't rank, this probably would be the team that I would say you could make an argument for the number 1 position of the 4 that weren't ranked there. I mean, this team has a great argument. 14-2, the 1989 Super Bowl champs, 27.6 points a game, just under 16 points a game allowed. First in offense, third in defense and scoring. This team was a juggernaut. This team failed to score less than 12 points in any of its games. And scored at least 30 points 11 times. 3 times they went over 40, and in the Super Bowl against the top-rated AFC defense, the Denver Broncos, Joe Montana's 5 touchdowns shredded the defense 55-10. Montana had probably his best year that year. 26 touchdowns and 8 picks for a passer rating of 112.4, which is the time which was a league record. Completing 70.2% of his passes. And the guys he had to throw to were pretty good too. You had Jerry Rice, the greatest wide receiver in league history, with 1,483 receiving yards and 17 touchdowns. And one of the most underrated receivers in league history in John Taylor. 1,077 yards and 10 touchdowns. Both Pro Bowlers. Roger Craig with 1,054 yards and 6 touchdowns, also a Pro Bowler. On defense, safety Ronnie Lott. 5 picks, vicious hitter. The rest of the defensive unit had 2 guys with 10.5 sacks each, Charles Haley and Pierce Holt. And you had second-year linebacker Bill Romanowski with 53 tackles, who'd go on to be one of the most controversial and one of the most surprisingly good linebackers in league history. I mean, you wouldn't think of him as being great. You just remember the dirty things. But he was a hell of a hitter and a fierce tackler. But more importantly, when this team got into the playoffs, maybe the most dominant postseason team in league history, and I'll tell you why. This team averaged 42 points a game and gave up 9 points a game. So that's a differential of plus 33 points per game in the postseason. And the 3 teams they went against, the Minnesota Vikings had a very good team that year, had beaten them a couple years prior in the playoffs. The Rams had beaten them earlier this season and gave them 2 really, really close games. Drubbed 30-3. And you have the Denver Broncos. 55-10 they beat in the Super Bowl. The fact that Denver, other than John Elway and a couple of good players on that pass defense, that really was kind of, expected to happen because San Fran was just that good. But absolutely deserved to be in this list at number 4. Coming up at number 3. This is where the controversy starts. The number 3 greatest Super Bowl winning team of all time. The 85 Bears. For those viewers who didn't turn me off after saying that the 85 Bears were 3rd best, I'm going to explain myself in a second. I initially had the 85 Bears at number 1. I did. I thought that, this team's defense, second in the league in scoring at 456 points in the season, they deserve to be number 1. And then I realized something. That when I did my bit yesterday on the 10 greatest defenses in league history and had the Bears number 2, I remember, if you could block the 46 defense that they featured that year with their pass rushers decently, and you had enough time to throw and you didn't commit turnovers, you were going to be in that game. The Bears that year just didn't play that many good offenses. And the one that they did was Marino and the Dolphins, and Marino and the Dolphins beat their ass. That's the only loss they had that year. But still, you got to focus on the good. And the reason why they're number 3 on this list. Second in points per game, 28.5. First in points allowed, 12.4. They forced 54 turnovers. That's 3 per game. And were plus 23 in the turnover margin. They allowed combined 10 points in their 3 playoff games and 2 shutouts, the 2 shutouts against the Giants and the Rams, and 10 points against the Patriots in Super Bowl 20. They scored 33 plus points 7 times and allowed less than 20 points all but 3 times. That's a roster you could say definitely would be worthy of being the number 1 team in this list, but you know, they played a few teams that year that weren't very good. The Giants really weren't that good of a team that year. The next year they'd be a great team, but they really weren't that good in '85, and they beat them 21-0. The Rams were a half-decent team, but they were only as good as Eric Dickerson, the running back, and they got shut out. And in the Super Bowl, I mean, the Patriots just had no shot in that game. They just didn't. I mean, the quarterbacks were looking for places to hide under the carpet in New Orleans, you know. They just lit up the Superdome because, you know, the Patriots offense just didn't have the weapons and the skills to keep up with the Bears, you know. And they lost 46-10. Just goes to show you what happens. But the 46 defense that they had for that 3-year stretch where they didn't play any really great offenses, oh man, they were a nightmare. All right, everybody, number 2. The number 2 greatest team in league history that won a Super Bowl. And this is where you're even going to get even more listeners turning me off. The 1972 Miami Dolphins. 14-0, finished 17-0, and won Super Bowl 7 over the Redskins, 14-7. Now, before I get to the cons, I'll tell you why the pros of why they have a shot at number 1. The only undefeated team in league history throughout the season, Super Bowl included, 17-0. First in scoring offense, 27.5. First in scoring defense, 12.2. First in yards per game, 359.7. First in yards per game allowed, 235.5. 3 shutouts, 211 rushing yards per game on average they forced. 9 Pro Bowlers. 2 of their running backs, half their offensive line, half their defense, and one of the most dangerous deep receivers in the league's history, Paul Warfield. Now, before people get on me as why the 72 Dolphins and the 85 Bears are not number 1 on this list, let me just revisit something. The Dolphins that year played the Browns in the divisional playoffs. Wait a second, what's the Browns? Yeah, it was the Browns in the divisional playoffs, and they barely scraped by them 14-20. This is a Browns team that barely scored more points than they gave up, and the 17-0 Dolphins had to really work to beat them. Then the AFC Championship game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. The team that had just ridden the high of the Immaculate Reception, and it took a fake punt to reverse the momentum and ultimately result in victory for the Miami Dolphins. You take away that fake punt and the Dolphins lose momentum and they don't win that game. So they were very lucky to get through that game. And then in the Super Bowl against the Redskins, the Dolphins' offense didn't move the football particularly well. They only scored 14 points in the game. Even though they held the Redskins to only a special teams touchdowns, which was a 49-yard fumble return by Mike Bass, the Dolphins' offense really didn't move the football a whole lot. They didn't even hit 300 yards in the game. I mean, Larry Zonka ran for 112 yards, and Jim Kick added a touchdown run, and Bob Creasy a touchdown pass. They played, I think, one of the weaker teams to ever reach the Super Bowl in the Washington Redskins. And they still had to struggle at the very end to beat them. A team with not a whole lot of star power, a team that played in a weak NFC that year, And honestly, that does kind of take away the credentials of that team. Now, I know, yes, they beat everybody they lined up against. But back in the day, with no free agency, no salary cap, it's easier to build a team like that and leave other players out. I mean, look at the way the Redskins ran their team with George Allen as the coach. He didn't keep his draft picks. He would just get veteran players because he hated rookies. I mean, you look at the other teams they played. In the regular season, they played two teams with winning records, the Giants and the Chiefs, and each of those teams was 8-6. They beat a Cleveland team that barely scored more points than they gave up, and they beat the Pittsburgh Steelers, a team still riding high off the luck of the Immaculate Reception. Is this team worthy of being this high on the list? Yes. But are they worthy of being number one? No. 17-0 in the fact they were first in points scored and points allowed, and yards gained and yards given up puts them where they are. All right, everybody. Coming up next, the controversial finish to my list of the best teams in Super Bowl history. Number one with a bullet. And there's no doubt anymore in my mind after I think about it.